Welcome to Teapot Genies. Kay, Wendy and I have found that we have ancestors from the Orphan school at Parramatta in the early 1800s, and we're here to find out more about the conditions that they lived under. And to help us, we have with us today Judith Dunn from Pastime Tours to give us an insight into how the orphans lived, survived and died.
These are the stairs that the orphans climbed to their new home. Just imagine how they'd feel coming in from the ages of 2 to 12, climbing this staircase. They're already scared, lost their parents, coming to a new home. And then as they climbed this staircase, their new home would appear to them over the horizon. This was the first 3-storey brick building in Australia, so this was a skyscraper to them, as small as it seems to us today. And it must have loomed very large over the horizon to these little children.
Judith, when did the female orphan school open here?
Well, there was actually an orphanage before this one, and it was built at Circular Quay. But the low class of convicts and sailors around the quay were interfering with the children, and they decided to build another in a remote place. And the remote place was here just outside Parramatta. So they started building here in 1813, and the first orphans, 80 children, rowed up the river to the boat shed and came in here in 1818.
Were there only girls here, or when did the boys come?
It did go co-ed in 1850. Until then the boys were on Orphan School Creek in their own orphanage, but they decided to amalgamate, and from 1850 on it was co-ed here.
Judith, what are the buildings used for now here at Parramatta?
The female orphan school building itself is currently empty because it's undergoing refurbishment by the university, but they are very aware of the importance of the heritage of the area, and as soon as the building has been refurbished they will bring it online as one of the buildings for the university campus itself.
But it won't be specifically as a heritage building that was the female orphan school, it'll just be a university room, will it? It
will be used as the university, but I know that they understand, of course, the importance of the buildings, and it will always be treated as a very special place, I'm sure.
Judith, how many children would have been here at any one time?
At the start there were just 80 children came in at the opening of the school, but when it was up to its peak running there were 260 children here at a time.
What would the conditions have been like in the early days?
For its day it was a very well run orphanage, but I'm sure none of us would have wanted to be there under the conditions as we know them today. The children were sleeping 2 or 3 to a bed, depending on their size, but they did have beds. It was certainly better than being on the street, and one of the main benefits was that they were learning to read and write. But they had lost their parents, and they were sent out to work at the age of 12 or 14. At that age they were apprenticed out. If you find girls in here at the age of 16 or so, you'll know that they have shown an aptitude for working with the young children, and they have been taken on as junior nursery maids.
What other activities did the children do apart from schoolwork while they were here?
They may have been in school for half a day at the most, and they were really being educated as servants. So the girls would be doing some plain sewing. I know in a visitor's journal she wrote that when she visited, the little girls were all happily scrubbing their own patch of floor. Now how happily that was, I don't know. And she did note that they were stockingless and bootless, down scrubbing their own patch. The older girls, of course, were looking after, or helping to look after the younger girls. And the boys were working in the fields. They grew their own crops here, some animal husbandry, they were looking after the cattle. So they had their own farms here to grow their food. Although you wouldn't have wanted to be in here for its time, it was a well-run orphanage. Matron Betts, who was the youngest daughter of the Reverend Samuel Marsden, was far advanced of her time. She actually said for the first, when the children came in here, they were not coming into an industrial school. They'd done nothing wrong and they must have time to play. Now that was very forward thinking for the day.
Those days, yes.
Yes, but there was still punishments that we would find unacceptable.
Yes. So what sort of punishments would have been handed out to them?
Oh, I know little girls who persisted in climbing trees had their legs chained to logs.
Oh.
Well, you couldn't climb a tree with a log attached to you.
God.
There were dark cells built outside the main building, and they were for older girls, and they were locked in there. Not if someone had just misbehaved once, but children that continually misbehaved could be locked in there, and the matron's book said until they came to their senses, however long that was.
Were there many children that died here?
Unfortunately, yes, that wasn't lack of care. But the big problem was not so much accident as disease. If one child caught an infectious disease, sleeping 2 and 3 to a bed, anything like that passed on very rapidly. In 1843, in a major epidemic here, 1/4 of all the children died. And from then, you see the letters being written where they're pressing for their own isolation hospital, which they did actually achieve in the 50s, and that's still extant.
That's on this property as well?
Yes. A little girl here called Eliza was caught stealing. She passed some aprons to an aunt that visited her. And this is just an example of the punishments. She was put on bread and water in solitary confinement for a month.
Oh,
Good grief.
She had to wear a wooden collar around her neck with thief written on it.
Oh.
And at the end of the month, she was brought before the assembled orphans and drummed out of the orphanage,
Oh, so where would she end up?
back on the streets.
Oh dear. So were there any famous people that came out of this orphanage?
Balmain's children were in here, but you've got to understand that this wasn't just an orphanage that was important for this little area, but it was the model orphanage of the day. So when some children were orphaned in Queensland, they were brought all the way from Queensland to this orphanage. When there was an epidemic in India, 6 little girls were orphaned, put on a ship in Madras and sent to this orphanage.
Oh, amazing.
It was a most important place.
So when did the orphanage close down, Judith?
As it got up into the 1880s, the fostering out system became in vogue and a much more suitable arrangement. So the children were gradually starting to be boarded out, and there wasn't a need for this big orphanage. The numbers went down and gradually they closed it down. 1886 it finished, and in 1888 it reopened as Rydalmere Mental Hospital.
Well, Judith, thank you for your help today. You've been a wealth of information, and even though none of us would like to live under these conditions, I suppose we're thankful that somebody did, otherwise we wouldn't have been here. And I just want to thank you again and wish you all the best for pastime tours. And if you have any other interesting subjects that you'd like us to follow through, please email us at genies@banana TV. And until next time, bye for now.